Hello again. As anarchists, we oppose the state in all its variants and manifestations. Unlike the authoritarian right, left or centre of politics, we utterly reject the whole idea of the police, something that is now entering mainstream thought as social confrontation increases. The police are the most visible everyday arm of the state, the uniformed hirelings of the government, enforcers of the ruling class law, defenders of the status quo. Rather than the mythical Bobby on the beat, they are now perceived quite rightly by many people as a paramilitary force indulged in a low-level war with a growing section of the population, in particular as we struggle to survive recession, austerity, increased exploitation, eviction, social cleansing and marginalisation. For many, the police are the state and the law. Their main function is, and always has been, to defend and protect private property of the rich and powerful. All the rest follows on from that, and to enforce the law of the rich and the government that represents them, and to control and repress the lower orders. It goes without saying that this ultra-authoritarian arm of the state is institutionally racist and anti-working class. I think the images of the miners' strike 30 years ago of thousands of police mobilised to escort racist marches through working class immigrant areas are the most blatant and immediate examples that spring to mind. But there are so many others. They are absolved of blatant murder by the system. Just look at the amount of people, many black, almost all working class, who have been killed by the police in custody, during arrest, or just simply killed and shot on the spot. Not one officer has served 1 minute's imprisonment as a result. Most of the riots and urban uprisings we've experienced these past 35 years on mainland Britain have been, along with intense episodes of street harassment against youth, the result of police killings. For us anarchists and activists, there is the added atrocities of the police infiltration of the so-called fluffy, non-violent direct action part of our movement. In behaviour reminiscent of the k.g.b. and Stasi, they developed long-term sexual relationships with activist women, targeting them, even having children with them. The ramifications of all this are still being played out. Many, including the victims, are calling it state-sanctioned rape. There is nothing more chilling than the idea of a police state, but that, in 21st century UK, is where we are increasingly heading. Gestapo behaviour, such as raids on workplaces to search out so-called illegals, all add to this image. Plus thousands of police mobilised, as I mentioned before, to escort racist, fascist incursions into working class immigrant communities, like here in the East End, in Tower Hamlets, and of course the hundreds of arrests that result as we defended our community last time against the EDL when it tried it on. I could go on all day. Doesn't really need spelling out further, does it? Or should I mention the police cover-ups and support for industrial-scale sexual abuse of working-class children over several decades by top-ranking members of the establishment? Still, despite bubbling under the surface, and yet to break, although one example of this, the Janabis, could be almost about to. And there has been an increase in the brutality of arrests during protests. People forced onto the ground, restrained by half a dozen officers, and cuffed. The brutality towards the disabled protesters in the Houses of Parliament last Wednesday is another example. People on wheelchairs brutalised by the police. How long before the first fatality during an eviction or a fluffy event? It looks certain as protests, direct action, dissidence increases. How long before we see water cannon, baton rounds and tear gas used on the streets of mainland Britain? And the police will use them with relish, and the police always obey orders, whatever they are. The police are the mainstay of the system. Just let me conclude with a few reflections upon the police from the perspective of the non-anally retentive working class, what the darlings of the left call the lumpen. We've been brought up with our mother's milk, socially, parentally, to have absolutely nothing to do with the police under any circumstances. We don't have to be lectured by middle-class lefties and liberals about the cops. We already have direct experience of their harassment, racism, violence, from being fitted up, a planting of evidence, in particular drugs, to falling down the stairs when detained, right through to their blatant lies in court. And the courts, another arm of the state, always believe the police. And remember, amongst people like us, the informer or the grass is always regarded as the lowest scum form of life. The future, the near future, will see increased confrontation between larger sections of the population and the police, as they desperately defend the rotten system and status quo. Mr. Russell Brand may want to love bomb the police, but once the water cannon, tear gas and baton rounds are employed, I'm afraid it'll be petrol bombs. So it's back to basics. Police state, no state.